I would like to thank you firstly for the honor of moderating this part of our event. And I would like to, without further ado, introduce our first speaker for today, Karen Stone. Karen Stone works for the Canadian Red Cross as the International Humanitarian Law Coordinator for Western Canada. In this role, she has worked to build awareness of the rules of armed conflict and humanitarian issues, and to engage stakeholders on the importance of IHL. Karen previously worked for Médecins Sans Frontières, I must have butchered that, sorry, in Nigeria, Geneva Call in Myanmar, and ECPAT International in Thailand. She has a Master of Public Administration from the University of Manitoba. With that being said, Karen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Philippe, for that kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are in the world. My name is Karen, and I'm part of the IHL team at the Canadian Red Cross. It's customary in Canada to acknowledge the traditional lands on which we sit when we're doing a presentation. So I would like to mention that I am speaking to you today from Winnipeg, Canada, which is located on Treaty 1 territory and the traditional and ancestral lands of many Indigenous nations. I am so pleased and happy to join you today and participate in this really exciting conversation about IHL and cultural property. I would like to thank Maat for Peace, Development, and Human Rights, and the IHL Clinic at the University of Rio Grande do Sul, and especially Ms. Norhan Mustafa for the invitation to join this panel today. And thank you so much, Philippe, for moderating. As I mentioned, I work as part of the IHL team at the Canadian Red Cross. Now, we, as part of the IHL team, we work to protect the dignity and lives of people affected by armed conflict, by encouraging respect for IHL in Canada and around the world. We do this in 3 ways. We work on education, training, and advocacy. We also work really closely with the other components of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movements, including the ICRC. So the ICRC acts as the guardian and promoter of IHL by taking action to protect and assist victims of armed conflict and to foster respect for the law. It does this by spreading knowledge about IHL, supporting its implementation at the domestic level, by monitoring respect for it, and by reminding parties to conflict of their obligations. The ICRC also plays an important role in the development of IHL. The 4 Geneva Conventions, which is, as Norhan mentioned, the 73rd birthday of the Geneva Conventions today, and their additional protocols also give the ICRC a special or a specific mandate to act in the event of armed conflict. So as you know, under IHL, parties to a conflict must protect and respect cultural property. They have a responsibility to protect against direct attacks, or to protect against using cultural property for military purposes. They also need to take measures to stop theft, pillage, and vandalism. Cultural property should be recognized for its unique connection to the past, and it is part of all human heritage. The international community, including the Red Cross, Red Crescent, has recognized what is at stake and has responded with the development of measures to respond to violations and to promote respect for the rules. So what does the law say? Of course, cultural property is normally civilian in nature. So it's protected under IHL as all civilian objects are under the Geneva Conventions and additional protocols. The rules relating to the means and conduct of hostilities are outlined within the additional protocols, and these apply, including the concept of military objectives, which is clarified in AP1. Now, after the First and Second World Wars, there was a large-scale loss of cultural property, and cultural heritage law developed at the international level. And it was recognized because certain objects have great importance and hold cultural value to humanity as a whole. An additional legal framework was needed. So the 54 Hague Convention and its additional protocols set out rules for safeguarding and respecting cultural property, as well as introduced an element of special protection. So according to the Hague Convention, destruction of cultural property is prohibited unless required by imperative military necessity. States are also required to take measures during times of peace to protect cultural property. Additional Protocol 1 addresses movable cultural property and prevents the movement of cultural property outside of occupied territory. In 1999, the second protocol to the Hague Convention was introduced, and this protocol clarified and complemented the original treaty. Now, fundamental principles within the Hague Convention are accepted as customary law, and the ICRC outlines a few of these customary rules in its customary law database. So rules 38 through 41 on the ICRC website talk about customary law rules, including parties to a conflict must take special care to respect cultural property, the use of property of great importance to the cultural heritage of every people for purposes which are likely to expose it to destruction or damage is prohibited. Prohibitions on seizure, willful damage, theft, pillage, and vandalism. And then occupying powers must prevent illicit export of cultural property. There have been a few examples of international cases brought forward relating to the protection of cultural property. So during the war in the former Yugoslavia, cultural and religious sites were systematically destroyed in an attempt to erase the culture of targeted people. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia recognized the protection of cultural property and the application of the Hague Convention under customary law, and determined that systematic crimes against cultural heritage can amount to crimes against humanity. The ICC recognizes that the most serious violations of these rules constitute war crimes. This is outlined in Article 8 of the Rome Statutes. And in 2016, the ICC sentenced al-Mahdi to 9 years imprisonment for the deliberate destruction of 10 religious and historic monuments dating back to the 15th century in Timbuktu, Mali, which was a designated World Heritage Site. This was the first time the ICC categorized these types of activities as war crimes. State parties to AP2 are obligated to adopt domestic legislation to address violations of the Hague Convention and establish jurisdiction over these crimes. So for example, in Canada, there are domestic laws to prosecute violations. So in the event of serious violations, these crimes can be prosecuted under the National Defense Act or the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. The Red Cross, Red Crescent movement works to protect cultural property in the event of armed conflict through disseminating information about IHL, encouraging states to adopt domestic measures to protect cultural property, and encouraging the ratification of international treaties. So for example, the ICRC helps states with the ratification and domestication of relevant treaties by publishing different guiding documents. So the ICRC has published a model law, a ratification kit, and a fact sheet to support states in these efforts. The ICRC also has a memorandum of understanding with UNESCO to work on this issue. So while UNESCO has expertise on facilitating the removal of objects and developing standards and measures to protect cultural property, the ICRC supports through the dissemination of IHL and on domestic implementation. The ICRC also has a memorandum of understanding with the Blue Shield to commit to working more closely together to ensure the protection of cultural property during conflicts. When cultural property is lost through destruction, theft, removal, collective knowledge of the past is lost and educational resources about previous civilizations become more limited. Even during war, people and communities want cultural property preserved. The ICRC conducted a survey, a public survey in 2016 about the rules of war, And the survey found that most respondents said they believed it was wrong to attack religious and historic objects. And in countries that were affected by armed conflict, the percentage of people stating these practices were wrong was even higher. The destruction of cultural property can lead to long-lasting resentments and impede the peace process, especially when cultural property has been destroyed in tandem with other elements of ethnic cleansing or genocide. The protection of cultural property, on the other hand, can be looked at as one step closer to peace and normalcy after a conflict ends. The repatriation of cultural property looted during times of war can be legally, diplomatically, and logistically complex. Restorations of buildings and heritage sites is extremely expensive. And finally, the theft of cultural property is potentially a source of funds. So cultural heritage sites can be pillaged to help finance military operations, thus fueling or prolonging conflicts. The destruction of cultural property is a serious threat to the global community. It is a clear violation of IHL, but while the law is clear, addressing violations is fraught with challenges, and more efforts and motivations are needed to protect cultural heritage through education, through training and advocacy, as well as encouraging states to establish mechanisms for safeguarding cultural property during times of peace and times of war. Attacks on cultural property need to be understood for what they are: attacks on belonging, identity, memory, and humanity as a whole. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Karen. I must say I especially admire the manner in which you introduced this your panel, and I must say more countries in the Americas should adopt the traditional thinking of or recognition of our native peoples. And thank you very much for your exposition on the issues surrounding the destruction and exploitation of cultural property. With that being said, I would like to move on to our next speaker, my fellow Brazilian, Ivonei Souza Trindade. Ivonei is he's a lecturer of international human rights law at APARI MUN, Instituto de Investigación y Debate en Derecho in Peru. He's the author of publications regarding international cultural heritage law and international human rights law. He is also an associate member of Société Québécoise de Droit International in Canada. With that being said, Ivonei, please, the floor is yours. Sorry, just wanted to, before moving on, I would just like to say that after the speakers, we will have time for questions. There will be around 10 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please already start thinking about them, send them in the chat box, and I will direct them at our speakers afterwards. Thank you so much, and sorry for the interruption, Ivonei, you can go on.
No problem. No problem. So thank you very much for your kind presentation, Felipe. I would like to congratulate both Maat and IHL Clinic from URGS for this event and also for this research regarding protection of cultural heritage in times of war. Even though here in Brazil, some researchers at first view, when they see the issue regarding protection of cultural heritage, sometimes they can understand as a far problem from Brazil, but it's a worldwide problem because the impacts regarding the protection of cultural heritage in times of war, they face a worldwide impact. For example, when occurs a pillage or a theft of cultural objects in Palmyra, for example, and these objects appears, like for instance, in Europe or here in South America, this is a clear example that it's a worldwide problem and a worldwide issue that shall be regarded by all researchers of international humanitarian law. So that's why I would like to congratulate these
Are you back with us,
connection?
Okay,
Yeah, are you back with us? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, you can go on.
No problem. So this is a clear example that it's a worldwide problem regarding the protection of cultural heritage law. It's not a regional problem. It's a worldwide, because these impacts we can be seen in many continents, not only where it occurs the conflict. Regarding some recent issues regarding the protection of cultural heritage law, I would like to say that, for instance, that sometimes it's very hard to evaluate the damages regarding the cultural heritage in recently. How can I say more clearly to you? For example, when it ends an armed conflict, after its ending, it's very sometimes it takes some years to see the fully evaluation of this problem. For example, when ended the Bosnian War, for example, UNESCO took some years to see the full damages that happened to cultural heritage on that region. Recently, I have read the UNESCO report regarding the cultural heritage damages in Crimea invasion that was released last year. So 7 years after this event, that UNESCO could see the full damage of this. The UNESCO could understand the full damage of cultural heritage regarding the invasion in Crimea. So that's why sometimes it's hard to see this fully evaluation. But in other instances, regarding international tribunals that are analyzing cultural heritage damages in times of war, as Karen just mentioned, the cases from ICTY and Al-Amadi case from ICC. Recently, we have one case that is being analyzed by International Court of Justice, is the Armenian versus Azerbaijan case. And in last year, a provisional measure granted by the ICJ regarded this theme of protection of cultural heritage in times of war. So that's a case that all researchers that are interested in international humanitarian law must pay attention, because if you read this provisional measure, you can see that International Court of Justice, when analyze the merits of this case, will analyze the issues regarding cultural heritage in times of war. So that's an example of a case that all international humanitarian law researchers must pay attention regarding just this single provision of this one single provisional measure granted by International Court of Justice. So that's why this theme is so important. And also regarding the Crimea, this Ukrainian war, for example, if I'm mistaken, last week, UNESCO announced that this organization will start to analyze impacts of the harms of cultural heritage in Ukraine. So the UNESCO will start to evaluate these damages on this ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So this is so interesting. This issue is not it's a thing that it's very live to us. It's very and the impacts are very close to us. This issue regarding the protection of cultural heritage in times of war and armed conflict. So I would like to end my speech. It's very brief. And I would like to congratulate you, both researchers from Maat and IHL Clinic from URGS. It's a very pleasure to be with you this morning, evening, afternoon. I don't know how to say, but congratulations for you. And thank you very much for inviting me for this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words and for gracing us with your presence. Next on, we will have a panel from Ambassador Mushira Khattab, but I have been told that she has sadly suffered from some connection issues, and it seems that she won't be able to participate. In that case, I would like to move on to our next panelist, Monia Amar. Monia Amar is a judge at the Court of Cassation in Tunis, a former regional advisor to the International Committee of the Red Cross, and she also works in some capacity as an expert on her field at the League of Arab States. Judge Monia will be speaking to us in Arabic, and a translation of her speech in English shall be posted in the chat box as she goes. With that being said, Mrs. Monia, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy and glad and very pleased to be with you in this event. I would like to apologize because I prefer speaking Arabic. I feel more comfortable with. And for that, again, I apologize. الحقيقة قبل أن أبدأ أريد أن أشكر مرة أخرى مؤسسة مات لهذه الدعوة وللسماح لي بالمشاركة من قبل خلال كل هذه السنة في بعض النشاطات ومع هذا الشباب. وقد أشعرتموني أنني شابة رغم أن منظمة الصحة الدولية قالت أننا شباب إلى 65 سنة، فأنا منكم وإليكم وشابة قديمة نوعا ما. على العموم، موضوع الممتلكات الثقافية الحقيقة يثير فينا العديد من الموضوعات الهامة جدا، وقد اخترت اليوم بعد أن تم استعراض من طرف من تدخل قبلي حول الجانب القانوني الدولي المسؤولية المحمولة على الدول، أن أتناول الموضوع من زاوية محددة، وهي تتعلق بأسباب تعاظم الهجمات والاعتداءات على الممتلكات الثقافية. عندما نستعرض كل القوانين الدولية وكل المجهودات التي بذلتها المنظمات الدولية، اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر، اليونسكو وغيرها من المنظمات الدولية الأخرى، وكذلك حتى المجتمع المدني، ونحن في صميم أنشطة المجتمع المدني، أقول أين ذهبت كل هذه المجهودات؟ أما كان يكفي كل هذا الإطار، هذه المنظومة القانونية الموسعة المعقدة التي حاولت بكل الطرق أن تحيط بالموضوع وتحد من هذه الاعتداءات على الممتلكات الثقافية، وأن تضع حداً للإفلات من العقاب. المحاكم الدولية رأينا كيف أنها أيضاً ساهمت في يعني إصدار أحكام ضد معناها بعد مجهود كبير واعتبار الاعتداء على الممتلكات الثقافية كجريمة حرب. إذن نقر بأن هناك مجهود على الصعيد الدولي، مجهود لوضع هذه المنظومة القانونية والمنظومة القضائية إلى غير ذلك. ويبقى السؤال: لماذا تتواصل الاعتداءات؟ لماذا نحن أمام مشكلة كبيرة أن هذه الاعتداءات تتعاظم رأينا معا كيف ماذا حدث في أفغانستان، ماذا حدث في سوريا، ماذا حدث في العراق، ماذا حدث في مالي. فأين المشكلة؟ هل المشكلة في القوانين؟ حقيقة مع الاعتراف بالدور الكبير الذي تلعبه القوانين وأهمية وجودها للردع وللوقاية، أقول أنه هناك أسباب أخرى، وكنت أتمنى أنه تكون الأستاذة سعادة السفيرة مشيرة خطاب معنا، باعتبارها أصبحت رئيسة المجلس القومي لحقوق الإنسان في مصر، أن نربط بين القانون الدولي الإنساني وحقوق الإنسان. لأنه لما نطالب أطراف النزاع باحترام القانون الدولي الإنساني بما فيه احترام الإنسان بصفة أصلية، والممتلكات الثقافية والبيئة بصفة تبعية، باعتبار أنه الإنسان في وجوده بحاجة إلى هذه الممتلكات الثقافية والدينية وغيرها. إذا كنا نطالب بهذا أثناء النزاعات المسلحة، فالأجدر بنا أن نتساءل عن مدى وجود وعي لدى أطراف النزاع بأهمية احترام الإنسان وبأهمية احترام هذه الممتلكات. لأنه ممكن القول أنه يعني أنتم تبحثون عن حماية البنايات والآثار والإنسان يموت إلى جانب ذلك. ما أهمية هذه الآثار إلى جانب أهمية الإنسان؟ فكل هذه التساؤلات تنم عن ضعف وغياب الوعي لدى الإنسان، لدى الأطراف المشاركة في النزاع، بأهمية احترام كينونة الإنسان وصفة أصلية، واحترام ممتلكاته الثقافية والدينية والبيئة التي يعيش فيها. وهذا مربط الفرس. حتى احنا لما نتكلم عن احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني دائما أطرح نفس السؤال: إذا كان الإنسان لا يحترم الإنسان أثناء فترات السلم، فكيف به أن يحترم الإنسان وممتلكاته البشرية أثناء النزاعات المسلحة؟ ونعرف جميعا، يعني نتخيل ما معنى نزاعات مسلحة، يعني توتر، يعني موت، يعني جرح، يعني اعتداءات إلى غير ذلك. فهذا يتطلب أولا وبالذات وجود ثقافة ووجود عقلية ووجود تمكن واستبطان ثقافة حقوق الإنسان وثقافة حقوق الإنسان في كافة أبعادها، وهذا مفقود. يجب أن نقر بذلك. نحن على الأقل، وتحدث وأنا أعرف يعني أنه هذه الظاهرة ليست موجودة فقط في المناطق الدول العربية أو الدول خاصة التي تعيش نزاعات اليوم، لكن شاهدنا اعتداءات كثيرة حصلت في أوروبا في غيرها من الدول. فالمشكلة أعتقد تعود إلى الوعي، رفع الوعي أثناء فترات السلم بأهمية احترام الإنسان وكل ما يتبع الإنسان وكل ما يحتاج إليه الإنسان. لأنه في حماية هذه الممتلكات الثقافية والدينية حماية لتراث الإنسان، حماية لتاريخ الإنسان اللي هو تاريخ ملك إنساني مشترك، ملك هو ليس ملك لأي أحد، هو ملك إنساني مشترك. ولذلك منظمة اليونسكو تحمي العديد من الممتلكات وتحاول وغيرها من المنظمات لحمايتها. الآن وقد يعني أنا بالنسبة لي المشكل يبدأ من هنا. على من تقع مسؤولية يعني رفع الوعي، معناها تقوية هذا الوعي. وأعتقد أنه أول مسؤولية تقع على الدول من خلال أولا يجب أن تترجم على ذلك من خلال انخراطها في المنظومة الدولية لحماية هذه الممتلكات وحماية الإنسان. الانخراط لوحده لا يكفي، نحن بحاجة إلى إفراغ مضمون هذه المنظومة الدولية والاتفاقيات الدولية في المنظومة الداخلية الوطنية، في التشريعات، في التعليم والتثقيف، من خلال نشاطات السماح وتشجيع المجتمع المدني على المساهمة في القيام بهذا الدور. وطبعا يعني لو تضافرت كل الجهود مرة أخرى من خلال تربية هذه الأجيال القادمة، وأنتم شباب قادرون على أخذ المشعل في هذا المجال، أنه نربي الأجيال القادمة منذ الصغر على احترام أي أثر فيه بصمة لتاريخ البشر، أن نعلم الأجيال القادمة منذ الصغر على احترام الإنسان وعلى احترام ممتلكاته وتاريخه وثقافته وخصوصيته، طالما أن هذه الخصوصية لا تتعارض مع أحكام القانون، قانون حقوق الإنسان والحقوق الإنسانية. فمرة أخرى أقول أن المسؤولية الأولى تقع على الدول، لكن تقع أيضا على المنظمات الدولية، لأنه وأقول هذه في العديد، أنا بالنسبة لي هذا حصان طروادة في حتى من خلال مركز القانون الدولي الذي لي شرف ترأسه. دائما عندما نبدأ في طرح إشكالية القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان، القانون الدولي الإنساني، دائما أضع أصبعي على أهمية نشر ثقافة حقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني منذ الصغر. المنظمات الدولية تعمل في هناك مجهودات كبرى، لكن أعتقد أنها لا تضع من ضمن أولوياتها نشر هذه الثقافة منذ الصغر. فبقيت يعني ثقافة القانون الدولي الإنساني، القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان، تكاد تكون ثقافة نخبوية. ليست كليات الحقوق هي التي تدرس في القانون الدولي الإنساني ولا القانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. ثم أعتقد أنه من نشأ على شيء، من شب على شيء شاب عليه. فإذا كنا بحاجة إلى أجيال إن شاء الله لن تشارك في النزاعات المسلحة، لكن أعتقد أنه للأسف تاريخ البشرية أثبت أن النزاعات المسلحة هي أيضا مقوم من مقومات الحياة، ولذلك نحن بحاجة إلى أن نربي الأجيال القادمة على احترام الإنسان، على احترام كل ما يعود للإنسان من مقومات، وخاصة منها الممتلكات الثقافية والآثار. اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر كما تفضلتم قامت بمجهود كبير، وأتذكر جيدا أنه كان هناك برنامج استكشاف القانون الدولي الإنساني، وكان الهدف منه في بداية الألفية كان الهدف منه أنه خلق نوادي في المعاهد الثانوية لنشر القانون الدولي الإنساني، ونجحت التجربة أيما نجاح. لكن كان الهدف أيضا أنه الدول بعد هذه 3 سنوات من المساعدة من اللجنة أن تأخذ على عاتقها هي هذه التجربة وتواصلها. لكن للأسف نعلم جميعا أنه على الأقل في المنطقة التي أعرفها، المنطقة العربية ومنطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، تقريبا غبنت هذه التجربة وبقيت وانتهت بانتهاء تدخل اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر. فمعناها أكيد أنه ما أقوم به، ما أطرحه اليوم هو زاوية أخرى أعتقد أنه من الضروري أن نطرحها، وأنتم شباب، من الضروري أن لا نطالب بفاقد الشيء أن يفعله. لا يمكن، مرة أخرى أقول أنه لا يمكن مطالبة أطراف النزاع في فترة النزاع أن يحترموا الإنسان ويحترم ممتلكاته، في حين أنه لم يتربى ولم ينشأ على احترام الإنسان ولا على احترام مقوماته. فكما قلت، نحن إلى جانب كل هذه المجهودات التي تقوم بها اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر، التي تقوم بها بعض منظمات المجتمع المدني في كافة القارات، أعتقد أنه بحاجة اليوم أنه نرفع أصواتنا عاليا من أجل أنه نتبنى استراتيجية دولية لنشر ثقافة حقوق الإنسان ونشر ثقافة القانون الدولي الإنساني، حتى نمنع العديد من الكوارث، حتى نحترم بعضنا أكثر فأكثر، حتى نحترم ممتلكاتنا، حتى نحترم ثقافاتنا، حتى نحترم الممتلكات الثقافية. المشكلة ليست في القوانين، المشكلة ليست في المبادئ التي تم إقرارها، المشكلة اليوم أعتقد أنها في الوعي، في نشر الثقافة الحقوقية بما فيها بفرعيها حقوق الإنسان والقانون الدولي الإنساني. هذا بكل سرعة ما أردت أن أساهم به، لأنه ما شاء الله يعني أفضتم في الحديث عن الإطار القانوني، وأعتقد لا فائدة في التكرار فيما قامت به اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر، اتفاقية جنيف، بروتوكولها، اتفاقية لاهاي إلى غير ذلك. هذا كل نعلمه جميعا، لكن حبيت أن نأكد على هذه المسألة. وشكرا لاستماعكم، وشكرا مرة أخرى دكتور أستاذة نورهان على الدعوة، وتحياتي للجميع بالتوفيق إن شاء الله. ويعني ألف صحة لكم على كل المجهود الذي قمتم به، وأنا في انتظار ثمار هذه المجهودات. شكرا.
Thank you very much for your words, Mrs. Monia. I think you really touch at the core of our issue here, that it's not sufficient to only physically protect cultural property. We really must instill these values of human rights and humanitarian principles in people early on to really see them being respected. This actually reminds me of the first sentence of the preamble to the Constitution of UNESCO, which is, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the fortresses of peace must be constructed. So thank you very much for your words. And I would like to also make a special thank you to Manar Ibrahim for translating the speech of Mrs. Monia over, because I myself, my Arabic limits itself to saying who I am and saying Ana la itakalam al-Arabiyya, which is exactly I don't speak Arabic. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I think this really touches what we are trying to do here as IHL clinics, organizations concerned with IHL. It's really raising awareness and sharing knowledge about this. That being said, I would like to move on to our questions. First of all, there is a question directed to Mrs. Karen Stone. With your permission, how has the Red Cross been able to help the Indigenous people in Canada? What have they done regarding their cultural heritage and property? And the person who asked this question recalls the situation in which Pope Francis recently apologized to them for the deeds committed against them. So please, Karen, if you would like to follow up with your answer to this question, what has the Red Cross done about this?
Thank you so much for the question. And I think it's very timely. I think we at the Canadian Red Cross were very pleased to hear the apology from Pope Francis. So I think it was an important step. Now, the Canadian Red Cross operates with what we call an Indigenous peoples framework. So we actually have an Indigenous relations team at the Canadian Red Cross, and they work, it sort of encompasses everything we do. And maybe what I'll do is I'll share the framework, a link in the chat so you can read through it. But basically we operate on sort of 4 fundamental pillars: a commitment to reconciliation, the importance of cultural safety. So this, in our domestic operations, when engaging with Indigenous communities, we ensure our work must ensure cultural safety, community-based service delivery, and collaboration. So we always work in collaboration with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities when we're operating. So I'll find the link and I'll share that. I'll also put my email in the chat. So if you have further follow-up questions, you can also reach out to me as well. I'm not on the Indigenous relations team, but I can also ask my colleagues if you have follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'd like to move on to our next question from Isabel. For a question directed to Professor Yvonne. She would like to know your perspective, Professor Yvonne, on the right of repatriation and restitution of cultural objects, and a possible obligation under IHL for the state parties to, under the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions, to do so.
So thank you very much, Felipe and Isabelle, for this question. Well, regarding the generally the return of cultural property, we have 2 very important multilateral treaties regarding restitution and as well as return of cultural property. But these treaties are not related only to times of war, but it's in times of peace as well. So the first treaty of import and export of cultural objects illicitly removed, and the second multilateral treaty is regarding the UNIDROIT Convention from 1995. Okay, but let's suppose that a country that violated provisions regarding protection of cultural heritage is not part of none of these treaties that I have just mentioned. Well, regarding the customary IHL law regarding the protection of cultural heritage, if you see under the database of ICRC, there are some provisions that can base the opinio juris for the devolution and the return of cultural property. For example, some provisions regarding the second the second protocol for the Hague Convention of 1954, for example, also provisions from the 1954 Hague Convention on Protection of Cultural Property. There are some provisions there regarding that the concerning this violation of cultural property, cultural heritage law when occurs a death and pillage of cultural heritage, and also the obligation to restitute this damage. So that's why if you understand these rules, if you interpret these rules, connected with the rule and the obligation to restitute and to reparate, you can see these provisions under the customary IHL. So I think that's my answer, very briefly. I don't know if I have answered, but thank you very much for this question.
Thank you very much, Professor Ivaneh. I would like to move on to our next question from Ahmed El-Senhoti. This is a general question, not pointed towards anyone in particular. So the question is, what are your suggestions for young people regarding work in the field of international humanitarian law? Mrs. Monyamar, would you like to start by your answer to this question?
Thank you. The question is very interesting, and I think the frame is very. I will switch in Arabic. إنه شكرا على السؤال مرة أخرى، لأن هذا في صميم أيضا محور ما تحدثت عنه. ماذا يمكن للشباب أن يقوموا به؟ وكما قلت أنه الشباب هو المفتاح، لأنه الشباب هو القادر أكثر من غيره على إيصال المعلومة لمن هم أصغر منه، للأجيال القادمة والأجيال، ويعرفون أكثر ما هي الوسائل الكفيلة بأن تجعل الأطفال والأجيال القادمة الصغيرة النشء قادرة على أنه يهتم بالموضوع. وكما قلت أنه التجربة التي قامت بها اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر من خلال برنامج استكشاف القانون الدولي الإنساني كانت قائمة على أنه يقع تكوين شباب في هذا المجال، وهم نفسهم ينشطون أندية، كانت أندية يعني للقيام بنشاطات داخل المعاهد الثانوية والتعليمية، تكون في قالب مسرحيات، في قالب رسومات، في قالب شعر، في قالب رسم، في قالب يعني كل الوسائط التعليمية والفنية متاحة من أجل أنه يقع التحسيس بأهمية حماية الإنسان وحماية الممتلكات الثقافية والبيئة بصفة عامة. وكما قلت أنه هذه الورشات، هذه الأندية التي تم تكوينها أنتجت العديد من الأعمال الفنية الخارقة للعادة. أتذكر أيضاً أنه الأمم المتحدة بمناسبة عشرية نشر ثقافة حقوق الإنسان وعلى هامش مؤتمر دوربن في جنوب أفريقيا حول الميز العنصري، كانت نظمت على الصعيد الوطني مسابقات وطنية حول لأطفال من 12 إلى 18 سنة، والمسابقة كانت مفتوحة بحيث أنه يتاح للأطفال في هذه الشريحة العمرية تقديم ما شاءوا ونظرتهم حول هذا الموضوع. وأتذكر أني كنت مسؤولة في وزارة حقوق الإنسان على هذه المسألة، وأتذكر جيداً اللوحات الجميلة جداً والأشعار والنصوص النثرية والرسومات والسكتشات أيضاً التي تم تطويرها من طرف هؤلاء الأطفال كما قلت من 12 إلى 18 سنة. فمرة أخرى أقول إنه الشباب قادر على فعل الكثير، سواء من خلال الهياكل الرسمية والمعاهد، المدارس إلى غير ذلك، أو من خلال المجتمع المدني، من بأنه يقع يعني تشريك الشباب ليقوموا هم بدورهم بنشر ثقافة القانون الدولي الإنساني. أعتقد زاد أيضا أنه نحن أمام فرصة ذهبية. وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي بكل تعقيداتها وتفرعاتها، والتي يمتلكها الشباب أكثر من الكهول وأكثر من غيرهم من بقايا فئات العمر. فهذه الوسائط فرصة أيضا لنشر القانون، ثقافة القانون الدولي الإنساني، التعريف بأهمية الممتلكات الثقافية، التعريف بأهمية الحقوق الإنسانية بصفة عامة، من خلال استغلال كل هذه الوسائط بطريقة ما. الموسيقى، الراب، يعني الفرصة متاحة، فقط هؤلاء الشباب هم بحاجة إلى تأطير، بحاجة إلى مساعدة، ولو فتحت لهم فرصة وأعطي لهم المجال أعتقد أنهم سيبدعون وسيقومون في فترة قصيرة بما لم تقم به حتى الحكومات نفسها، وهذا سيربحنا الكثير من الوقت. وأعتقد أنه في غضون يعني جيل آخر، إذا كان بدأنا اليوم فإنه بعد 10 سنين أو أكثر أنه سيكون لدينا جيل واعي، جيل متمكن من من ثقافة حقوق الإنسان، يعني مستبطنها وواعي بها وقادر على نشرها على الجميع.
Thank you once again for the great answer, Mrs. Moyamar. I would like to know, does Karen want to add something to this, please?
I just want to say I'm in full agreement with everything Ms. Monia said. Really, it's really essential and important for young people to engage on IHL. Young people are the future of IHL. I think we need, I know there's probably a lot of lawyers here today on the call, and we need legal experts in the field. We need law students to specialize in IHL and go on to work in government roles, advising your governments, advising your militaries, working for advocacy, human rights organizations, working in the field. So there's always a need for more delegates for the ICRC with legal expertise, but also there's a role for non-lawyers as well. So I don't have a legal background and I work on IHL. We need educators, we need people that are working with youth, children in schools. I really appreciate the person that shared the link to the ICRC's Exploring Humanitarian Law Toolkit. That's the work that's done in classrooms with children and high school students. But also I'm very inspired by the research project, the sharing of results, and the call or the conference today. This is important. This is how we promote IHL, promote respect for the rules, and engage on the issue. So just your time joining the call today is very inspiring, and this is what we need, more opportunities like this to learn, research, and contribute to the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you deeply, Mrs. Karen Stone. Yvonne, would you like to carry on and add something to the answers to this question? Please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I totally agree with Carrie, and also, for me, I would like to say for young researchers that are interested in the national humanitarian law and also the in the issue of protection of cultural heritage in times of war, in times of armed conflict. All these young researchers interested in these issues, they must pay attention in how the institutions that deals with these issues are working with. Like, for instance, how is the ICRC work? How is the UNESCO work? How is the Interpol work? How is the how some regional organizations are working with this issue? For example, recently I'm researching how Mercosur is working with protection of cultural heritage in times of peace. So this is a clear example for a researcher to search some regional organization and how this regional organization is working with these themes. So that's my brief comment here. I would like to once again thank you all for your invitation, and it's an honor for me to be part of this event.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ivanet. Just to add small comments, since I am in the capacity of a relatively young person who works with IHL, really look for, if you are seeking to start on this field, look for organizations in your region. Sometimes there are organizations from civil society that actually open up and hire interns and trainees in the area, especially in this part of social media. They're really starting to look into social media as a way of divulging. Like, I have seen the Red Cross do TikToks and Instagram posts to engage with the audience. So we really have a good baggage to work with that. And if you don't find an already existing organization working with that in your region, really create one. Sometimes it's a matter of proactivity. That's how, oh, sorry, I shut off my camera on accident. This is how the URGS IHL clinic started. So you can start something in your university if you are a university student or in any level of education that you might be on. You can start a club on the matter. And even independently, I have seen organizations start like that and become really big and huge. For example, U40PNW, I mostly work in the field of nuclear disarmament. So I have seen quite a lot of organizations in that field pop up in that way. U40PNW is one of them. It started as a completely independent group trying to engage, and we have become an official partner organization of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. I can cite, there is one good example from Canada, which is Gen No Nukes, an organization of young people. I believe they are mostly based in Ottawa. I am not quite sure about that. And I believe that organization has pursued advocacy measures and convinced the Ottawa City Council to join the city pledge for nuclear disarmament, basically a document in which municipalities, cities can sign saying that they favor nuclear disarmament. They are in favor of their countries joining the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And maybe you can do that in other fields of humanitarian law as well. So sorry for the intermission, but I hope that gives you some guidance on what to do. With that being said, I believe there is still one question, sorry, from, I don't know if your name is pronounced Basil or Basel or which other form, really sorry if I am mispronouncing it, but Basil has asked us, do you think that IHL can enforce with its current provisions how non-state actors participate in a conflict to respect the cultural heritage? Do you think that IHL is currently well equipped enough to enforce respect for cultural heritage from non-state actors? Once again, this is an open question. Mrs. Monia, would you like to start with your answer?
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Basil, for this very important question. مشكلة الأطراف النزاع المشاركة في النزاع والجماعات المسلحة أنها هي جماعات مارقة عن القانون، لكن عندما يقع التعامل معها حتى من طرف اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر هي لا تتدخل في مشروعيتها أو عدم مشروعيتها، وتتخاطب معها على أساس أنه هناك مسائل إنسانية يعني تبناها الضمير الإنساني والعرف الدولي، وكل فرد وكل أطراف النزاع مهما كانت مجموعات أو أفراد هم مطالبون باحترامها. وأعتقد أنه لنا ما نقول كثيرا من خلال تجربتي القصيرة مع اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر. يعني هناك دروس كثيرة يمكن استخلاصها من تجارب التعامل مع هذه الجماعات المتطرفة أو الجماعات غير الحكومية، الأطراف غير الحكومية المشاركة في النزاع، فإنه يقع اختيار لغة التخاطب معها. فإذا كانت هذه الجماعات دينية فيقع التركيز على القيم الدينية التي تحمي الإنسان وتطالب بحماية كرامة الإنسان وحياة البشر، وحتى في النزاعات المسلحة. ويقع الاستئناس بكل المخزون الموجود في مختلف الديانات وفي الدين الإسلامي، ولذلك حتى أنه ثم ما يسمى القانون الدولي الإنساني في الإسلام، لأنه نعرف جميعا أنه الآن على الأقل أنه أكثر هذه المجموعات هي مجموعات دينية تدعي أنها يعني مسلمة، لكن كما قلت أنه كيفية التخاطب مع هذه الجماعات هو المهم جدا، من حيث أنه يقع تذكيرها بأنه هذا الدين الذي أنتم تدافعون أو تدعون الدفاع عنه، هذا الدين يجرم العديد من الأفعال ولا يسمح ولا يقبل بسوء معاملة الأسرى والاعتداء على النساء والأطفال وحتى على البيئة. وطالما تم الاستشهاد والاستئناس بآيات من القرآن الكريم، وكذلك حتى من رسالة بعثها الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، وكذلك من خطاب سيدنا أبو بكر الصديق وهو أحد صحابة الرسول محمد، كيف بعث لزيد عندما كان يترأس يعني يقود جيش للفتوحات، ذكره أنه لا يجب أن يقتل امرأة أو شيخا أو طفلا، وأن لا يعتدي على البيئة وعلى الحيوانات المهمة حتى يقع استغلالها. يعني دائما يقع الرجوع إلى هذه المرجعيات حتى يتم التخاطب من خلالها وتحسيس هذه الأطراف. كما قلت أكيد أنه عندما نأخذ مسافة سنرى مدى نجاح هذه المقاربات التي اعتمدتها اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر وغيرها من المنظمات الإنسانية الأخرى لتحاول أن تقنع الأطراف غير الحكومية المشاركة في النزاعات المسلحة بضرورة احترام قواعد القانون الدولي الإنساني وبضرورة عدم الاعتداء على الممتلكات الثقافية. كما قلت، خاصة أن العرف الدولي هو قانون يلزم الجميع بغض النظر إذا كان طرفا أو لم يكن طرفا في اتفاقية جنيف أو في اتفاقية حماية الممتلكات الثقافية وبروتوكولاتها وغيرها من الاتفاقيات الدولية. وهذا هام جدا، ولذلك أنه اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر اهتمت وتهتم إلى اليوم بتطور العرف الدولي حتى يقع إلزام كافة الأطراف به، سواء كانت أطراف حكومية أو غير حكومية، وتذكيرها بهذه الالتزامات وبهذه الأحكام. شكرا على السؤال مرة أخرى بس.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Monia. Once again, I would like to ask if Mrs. Karen Stone wants to take on from now on and add something to about the question.
Thank you, and thank you, Basil, for your question. I agree with my colleague and everything that she said. I mean, just a very simple response to the question. I do believe that the provisions that are already in existence are sufficient, but what we need to do is work on engagement with armed groups, and this can be done. The ways that were highlighted by my colleague are very important, the ways of engagement, but I mean, things like awareness raising campaigns in areas where armed groups operate. So this could be social media, radio, television, these public campaigns to talk about the rules and create public awareness is really important. We need to clarify obligations with non-state armed groups so they understand what their obligations are under the law. And then we need to have training provided. So armed groups that are willing to engage, we need more organizations, local organizations and international organizations to provide this relevant training on the rules. Thank you.
So much. Ivone, do you wish to add something?
Thank you very much, Felipe. I totally agree with Karen. I have nothing to add. I totally agree that we must do all these provisions regarding the state actors, so nothing to add.
All right, thank you so much. I was told that there is somebody who wishes to make an intervention. I will pass the word to Nurhan briefly so that she can address the person specific. Thank you very much.
Okay.